Muy buenas tardes, maestros y maestras. Pues continuamos el día de hoy con los trabajos de esta jornada virtual para el Programa Nacional de Inglés. Como comenté al inicio de la plática anterior, el tema que ahora vamos a tratar se refiere a materiales, que es el uso del libro de texto, uno de los mayores inquietudes que se tienen en el trabajo en aula. Para ello, voy a presentarles a la profesora Claudia Piccoli Díaz, quien tiene más de 30 años de experiencia como maestra de inglés, como teacher trainer y como ponente. Ha trabajado con alumnos de todos los niveles educativos y en el dominio del idioma inglés, pues también ha participado en diferentes instituciones de educación formal. Ella es licenciada en pedagogía por parte de la UNAM, tiene una maestría en educación y es candidata al grado de doctor en humanidades. En el campo de la enseñanza del inglés tiene un diplomado en temas muy específicos del trabajo con profesores. Participó en el grupo de expertos de desarrollo para los estándares de competencia y dominio en idioma de inglés, en lo que conocemos como conocer, y ha sido ponente en diferentes foros, entre ellos Mextesol. Actualmente la profesora Piccoli colabora y está asesorando al Programa Nacional de Inglés en el tema específicamente de la revisión curricular, de la que por ahí hemos escuchado, y pues esta participación es muy pertinente para poder orientarles sobre este tema tan específico que son los libros de texto. Querida maestra, muy bienvenida a este espacio, te cedo la palabra, gracias por estar con nosotros.
Not quite the opposite. Thank you very much, Sark. And also thank you, Juan Carlos, for inviting me to this event. I'm really honored to be here. It is a pleasure. And well, welcome you all to this webinar. We are going to be talking about the use of course books in the PRONI classroom. And I'm going to start sharing my screen so that we can begin. Okay, so sometimes we as teachers wonder whether our course books or the textbooks we have to use are our friends or work against us. And that is part of what we are going to try to find out today. I hope you find this webinar useful. So what is the agenda? We are going to be talking about some criticism on commercial course books. Also, we will see how they can work or whether they can function and work as teaching and learning resources. We are going to analyze what course books offer PRONI teachers. We are also going to talk about what textbooks cannot do for PRONI teachers or for any teacher for that matter. And we're going to see how to plan a lesson adapting textbook suggestions, okay? So before we actually start the talk, I need to make a disclaimer, or rather two disclaimers, okay? First of all, I have to say that I do not work for any publishing house, neither am I representing one. And although I am going to be showing some textbooks and the names of some books, that doesn't mean that I am promoting their sale or anything. It's just for the purpose of making a point, okay? And the other disclaimer I have to make is that although I have never taught at, PRONI, I have had a lot of experience teaching children, young adults, not so young adults, and the suggestions that I will be making come from that experience. So let us start talking about our subject, textbooks. As you can see there, I don't know, there may be thousands or hundreds of thousands of course books or textbooks, both words are interchangeable, out there in the market, okay? And I imagine that right now, at this very moment, someone is writing one or printing one. So I guess it is virtually impossible to really know how many textbooks there are out there. But the problem with textbooks is that for some senior teachers or teacher trainers, because novice teachers can find them very useful sometimes, and no wonder, we will see why. But for people with more experience in ELT, they really see textbooks as a necessary evil, because there are some shortcomings, okay? For example, according to a number of authors, some textbooks may fail to present appropriate and realistic language models, okay? And that is a shortcoming. Or they may fail to contextualize language activities. You know, sometimes they present an activity, but without any previous context. And then it is very hard for either the teacher or the student to really understand what's going on, or what's the point that, for example, the activity is supposed to be making. Sometimes textbooks promote inadequate cultural understanding, you know, maybe by promoting a lifestyle that is not suitable to the students' real life context. So they really promote that. They may fail to teach idioms, or they may lack equity in gender representation. And this is very important because some textbooks show mostly males, you know, boys or male characters, and very few female characters. So authors also pay attention to these things, like, okay, what about gender representation? Like, do we have like a balance? What about people with learning, let's say special needs, with special learning needs? Are they being represented? Or with special needs in general? Sometimes those people, those students are not represented in the textbooks. But according to research, these same shortcomings can also happen when teachers make their own products, okay, or their own teaching materials. This is partly due to the fact that teachers have very little time to prepare those materials, okay? So they have a lot of time constraints. And besides, creating, you know, something like a textbook takes a lot of time and a lot of people. So I think it is fair to say that textbooks, although, you know, they may have all of these shortcomings, all of these limitations, also provide valuable teaching and learning resources that we as teachers can use, especially as a basis for lesson planning and delivery, okay? And here, these two words are key, okay? We as teachers need to plan. There is no way we can skip that step. And of course, at one point, we need to deliver. So what textbooks offer are certain tools that we can use to do both things, planning and delivery. So we know that PRONI offers teachers a number of teaching and learning resources. You can find them, for example, at the Canitech website. And this is just a sample, okay? I chose this particular name because I could find a sample of each book, type of book, with the same brand name. But we can see that you can find what's called big books or readers. They're lovely, by the way. You can find activity books, teacher's guides, audios, okay? Now imagine if we didn't have that and we had to create all of those out of the blue, okay? And here I have to make a friendly warning, okay? In order for, let's say, in order for me to really understand what I was going to present today, I really had to stop and do some research. And I had to translate that research into ELT language, let's say, okay? So while I was preparing for this talk, I really had, you know, I attended some of the talks that were delivered earlier this week. Also, I spent quite some time reading the Aprendizajes Clave and all that wonderful book, which really explains, you know, the syllabus, the PRONI syllabus. Because I guess, and I'm talking from my experience here, if I had to start teaching at PRONI tomorrow, I guess my first challenge, let's say, would be to really understand the syllabus. What is it that I am expected to do in the classroom? So that's why it was very important for me to translate this into like the ELT lingo, let's say, and the way we talk and the way we understand planning, delivery, and other things. So when I started doing that, I realized, okay, that what the syllabus was suffering was not different from what we usually do. Because, ELT, English language teaching, has one of its many roots in language pedagogy. Okay, it's not the only source of ideas or knowledge or research for us, but it's one of them, a major one, a big one. And in language pedagogy, there are different views. One of the views is the one we call the interactive view. And in this particular view of language pedagogy, language is considered a vehicle for the creation and maintenance of social relations. This is not new to us, English teachers, okay? We know because most of us use the communicative approach. We are familiar with communicative competence, you know, the term and everything. So we know that what we really want is not for the student to develop or to acquire these let's say, broad knowledge of words, isolated words, or this deep knowledge of grammar rules. That's not what we want. We want students to be able to use those rules, those words, you know, the correct pronunciation, the correct spelling of words, in order to communicate, okay? In order to create oral and written texts. Okay, so this is very important, and this is the same with language pedagogy. This discipline focuses on patterns of moves, acts, negotiation, and interaction found in conversational exchanges. Because again, conversational exchanges is key to us, and it is key to the PRONI syllabus, as we will see in a minute. Because everything comes down to it, right? To interacting either in writing or speaking. And of course, as I was saying, this is the basis for the communicative approach, which has been fairly dominant since the 1980s, okay? In some parts of the world, or even in some parts of Mexico, perhaps the communicative approach has not been fully implemented due to many different reasons, but without a doubt, it is, let's say, it is the approach, right? At least we recognize it, and many teachers claim to use it, even when they don't. And on the other hand, okay, something very important that is becoming major in education and in English language teaching more and more is social constructivism, okay? And some of you, if not all of you, are very familiar with this. This comes from the theories by Vygotsky. Actually, he wrote them earlier, much earlier than 1978, but that's when we started getting to know his theories here in the West, because he was Russian. And what he says is very important. He says, human development is socially situated, and knowledge is constructed through interaction with others. So, of course, this concept resonates in an ELT teacher's heart because, again, it comes down to interaction, to learning through and with others, okay? So you see here, the key is that interaction is not only the goal, but also the means to help students develop communicative competence. Now, here I have to stop a little and expand on the idea of helping our students develop communicative competence, because some of you may ask, well, but I am a preschool teacher. and I am teaching preschool 3. Or I am an elementary school teacher and I am teaching, I don't know, elementary 1, right? So what kind of communicative competence am I going to help my students develop? And my answer would be, yes, you have to help them develop communicative competence within the proficiency level that you are teaching. And that is very, very important because, as we will see, PRONI syllabus establishes very clearly what each cycle corresponds to according to the Common European Framework, okay? And we will talk about that in a little bit more detail. But what's key here to keep in mind, let's say, for the rest of the presentation is, as a teacher, I have to be very aware of the proficiency level that I am teaching, that I am working on. What it is expected from the student, in terms of the different skills, in terms of the social practices of the language. We will cover that in a minute. But within my proficiency level, that's where I'm going to let's say, impact, okay, on my students' learning. Sorry. So when I was reviewing the PRONI syllabus, I have to say, I have to admit that I was a little bit surprised at first. I didn't know how to read it because this is what a traditional ELT syllabus looks like. Okay. All of you must have seen this. Sometimes we call the syllabus scope and sequence. You find it at the beginning of every single textbook out there. And if we analyze it, what we see here is that we have titles, topics. The contents to be taught and practiced and recycled are presented to the teacher mostly, because teachers are the ones who use this the most, but also to the students in terms of the skills or the language systems. For example, I have here what I need to do to help my student improve his or her speaking, what I need to present in terms of grammar, or what I need to work on, in terms of pronunciation or listening, writing and reading. And this particular book includes something that's called interchange activity, which is like the communicative activity or the production stage in which students are going to put everything they've learned throughout a unit together. So we are very used to this type of syllabus. And suddenly, I opened my wonderful book and I see this. And it's like, okay, so what is this? Okay, communicative activity, that much I can understand. Expected learning outcomes, okay, I can understand that. Social practice of the language, okay, I can tell you that after attending, I'm sorry, guys. After attending the webinars earlier this week, I now understand very clearly what the social practice of the language is. But, to me, there were many things missing. It's like, okay, but what about the grammar? What about, because up here, I was expecting something like this, like, okay, so where's my grammar? Can anyone tell me what my grammar is going to be? Or, okay, so what's the vocabulary or the functions? Okay, I relate that to functions. So, and then it hit me. It took a while, I have to admit. It took a while because, breaking paradigms is never easy. And some of us have worked with this type of syllabus for a very long time, and then having to work with these may be challenging, but I always welcome a challenge, because I think that we are here to learn and to improve, and if we don't learn, then what's the point? So then I said, okay, so what are the major differences? What are the differences between the two types of syllabi? Well, first, As I said, they're based on grammar, vocabulary, functions. PRONI syllabus is based on social practices of the language. So that's the key. So then it brought me back to the interaction, and interaction being the goal, but also the means. And something very important that I realized was that the culmination of any particular social practice of the language is a learning product, okay? A learning product. That's how I'm going to make sure that my students really acquired and developed the social practice of the language. So that reminded me of the output. And I'm sure you've heard 1,000 times about input and output, which is very big in ELT. So I said, okay, well, this is something that I recognize. This is something that I can work with. And this is ELT, okay? So we have an environment. We have a learning environment, okay, in this particular case. Of course, students, ourselves, we learn, and everything we do and everything we read, everything we hear, that is also part of input that we then process and analyze. But in the particular case of the ELT world, okay, where it says environment, I would like you to think of learning environment. Okay, so in my learning environment, I'm going to be using some resources, which can be realia. It can be the textbook itself. It can be newspapers for students who are at a later proficiency stage. It can be anything, It can be what I'm saying to my students. And then the students are going to filter all those things through their senses, by their senses. And that is going to be their input, which is usually going to help them develop listening and reading, because the input is going to be in the form of spoken or written texts. Okay? And then, of course, our students, are going to process all that information, all that input from different sources. And there are going to, in their brains, there are going to take place many cognitive processes, okay? Let's say, for example, they're going to have to interpret what they see, what they hear, what they read. They're going to analyze it. They're going to deconstruct, And if they don't do that, if they don't go through that process of interpretation, and analysis and everything, they're not going to be able to come out with an output, okay? And that output is going to be the learning product that we want our students to be able to carry out, create, and then socialize. So we need to go through that cycle, And when I was choosing this slide, I said, well, this is going to connect to you, and it's going to remind you of some of the frameworks or cycles that some speakers presented earlier this week, okay? So this is important. And then I said, okay, so then for my learners, because I always have to, when I'm preparing a presentation such as this one, I have to think of myself. I have to put, let's say, myself in your shoes. It's like, okay, I'm the teacher. So what would help me? What wouldn't help me? So in order for my learners to be able to perform any social practice, they require a series of linguistic tools, okay? Because finally, while they are processing the information, they need to acquire tools, because they don't have all of the tools they need right now. It's like for you to be listening to this webinar or to any other webinar, you don't need to acquire any special tools because you already have them. Some of you have already, have already studied a bachelor degree in English language teaching, or some of you have taken the TKT, etc. So, but our students' case is very different. We need to provide them with these linguistic tools. So they need grammar, they need vocabulary, and they need practice in the use of skills. They do need that. Okay. But the syllabus doesn't tell me what those things are. Or, in some cases, some of the orientaciones didácticas, they suggest a few things. So we will see how PRONI sanctioned textbooks can help us with this and to help our students, okay? So first of all, I need to say that course books are designed around social practices of the language, okay? That is very, very important because if we as PRONI teachers were to use a textbook that is not sanctioned by PRONI or that was not created for that particular purpose, then they wouldn't be designed, they are not designed around SPLs, okay? So here, what we have is, for example, I only cut this, cut and pasted this part. This is what I'm supposed to do for this particular unit if I am teaching elementary second grade, okay? Of course, the syllabus includes many more communicative activities, but each communicative activity corresponds to a unit, okay? So let's say this is what I need to do. And as you can see, this particular textbook, okay, the one that I chose, says environment, family, and community, which is the ambiente that I didn't, that I just cut out. The social practice is use expressions of greetings, politeness, and farewell in a dialogue. So, of course, this is the social practice of the language. And then the expected learning outcomes come here in the achievements, okay? So what is it that my students are expected to achieve? Well, after this unit, at the end of this unit, they are expected to be able to revise exchanges of greetings, farewells, and politeness expressions in short dialogues. They are expected to assume the role of a receiver and a sender to exchange greetings, farewells, and other expressions. And this is where the product comes. They have to participate in the writing of classroom norms for the coexistence, okay? And all of that is going to come to fruition in an illustrated written classroom rules, which can take perhaps the form of a poster or a list of things that are allowed or are not allowed. Now, what happens to many of us is that because we are so used to the other type of syllabus that I showed you, it is sometimes difficult for us to really, let's say, really digest, really analyze and synthesize what it is that this means, okay? But that is something that textbooks can help us with. They cannot do all the work for us, as we will see, but they can help us, okay? Let me tell you what else they can offer. SPLs, okay, because as we see here, it's just okay, I know that that is going to take a unit, but how am I going to, dosify it, okay? So what should I do first? What can I postpone? That is something that the textbook can help me with, because social practices of the language are broken down into lessons. So, for example, this particular textbook that I was reviewing for this talk includes 4 lessons per unit, okay? So that as a teacher, for classroom management and for planning, that helps me because then I say, okay, so then I can do all these, in 4 lessons. And then I would cover my unit. Then something else, which is very important, is that textbooks provide visual scaffolding, okay? And although I know that most of you must know the meaning of the word, I hope that you will forgive me if I define it, because I think it's a very important term. Scaffolding is the provision of appropriate assistance, okay? So it's appropriate assistance. It means helping the students to do what? Well, to do what they cannot do on their own. If I ask my student to do something, and he already has like some, let's say, some tools, some previous knowledge, etc. Okay, but he might still be within that zone, let's say, as Vygotsky calls it, that it's like, okay, I'm almost there, but not quite there, okay? Okay, in that case, scaffolding is really, really, really helpful. But let me tell you something else about scaffolding. It can be done by the teacher. So the teacher can, provide scaffolding. Scaffolding can also be provided by a peer, or it can be provided by visuals, okay, by texts. In this particular case, it can be provided by the textbook, okay, and the images and the words that come with the text or in the text, okay. And that when the student sees something, okay, when the student sees a picture in which there's a teacher in front of a classroom and the teacher is writing something on the board, the student may not know how to describe that in English, of course, depending on the proficiency level they have acquired so far. But the student has a knowledge of the world, okay? The student has been in many similar situations, or in a few if he has just started attending school. But this knowledge of the world is going to help him or her interpret what he sees and kind of understand maybe the topic of the lesson, etc. So this visual scaffolding that we can find in textbooks is very, very, very important. Because if we didn't have it, we as teachers, when doing our planning, we would have to, search the web or scan pictures or bring realia into the classroom in order to have that. Okay, what else can they help us with? They provide input. They are a wonderful source of input because they have samples of written and spoken language, with the audios. Imagine if we didn't have those audios and we as teachers had to produce our own. Of course, if the student is at a very high proficiency level, we might be able to use some real contents, real material taken from the web, but that is not the case in the PRONI, okay? So we have that input there, we have those audios and those texts, which take the form of very, very short dialogues or descriptions, or what we find in the readers, stories. Never underestimate the power of a story, especially with children. Not only because we adults love stories, but children even more. So we can use that input in order to help our students practice reading and listening. Okay, what else do they offer? They provide practice opportunities, okay? Most of the times controlled or semi-controlled. Very hardly ever will we find like a free activity, perhaps for middle school, like the later years, especially because that is supposed to be B1. But let's say at this level, which is elementary second grade, what we have is very controlled writing, and very controlled speaking. But again, textbooks provide those opportunities. And this is key, they offer a possible version. A possible version. This is key. A possible version of how or what social practices of the language look like in the classroom, for the delivery part. And what do I mean by possible? There are many different ways. I hope you will forgive me, but I'm going to go back to the syllabus, okay? There are many different ways to achieve this, many different ways to do it. So the textbook that I may be using is going to offer me a possible version, okay? That's what I call it. You may have a better name for it. Because what textbooks really do is they propose. In our specific case, what they propose is a series of linguistic elements that students may need in order to perform the social practice of the language and to accomplish the task, which is to create and socialize the learning product. Okay? But it's just suggestion. Okay? It's just a suggestion. So we will go back to that, and then so what should I do with these suggestions? So just bear with me for a little longer. What else can we find in these textbooks? Well, they present the instructions for students to do the learning product in a very attractive way, with a little turtle and with all these visual scaffolding, with all these visual input that, again, if I didn't have the textbook and I had to draw that, well, I would be totally lost. And, children are very visual. So when they see these things, they really relate and understand, okay? It helps them process. And textbooks, finally, offer class delivery suggestions. Again, they suggest, they propose, we decide, okay? We as teachers decide. Don't let textbooks take that decision power away from you. Okay, it is very, very important because some teachers do. Sadly, some teachers allow textbooks to take control of their class. And then what they do is that they follow everything, instead of thinking of the class delivery suggestions as suggestions, they think of them as a must. And that is not the case, okay? Not in these textbooks, not in any other textbook for that matter, okay? And we will see what it is that textbooks cannot do for us, okay? We've seen that they can do a number of things, a number of important and valuable things. But these course books were written by people like you and me. And these writers have an experience, most likely a lot of experience. And they were very knowledgeable, in terms of, scaffolding activities and choosing these and better ways of presenting that. But guess what? They do not know your students, okay? They cannot possibly have known, the length and depth of your students' previous knowledge. or you're teaching context, because when those people, okay, when materials writers write books, it depends on the publishing house, but they write those books like for the average student, okay? So what's the level I have to write the book for? B1, good. And then, oh, this is what they are supposed to know for B1, but they don't know, they don't know your teaching context. They don't know whether the repertoire or the series of elements that they propose to you, it's like, okay, you need to teach this grammar, and I think it would be good for you to teach this vocabulary, but they don't know whether that is way beyond your students' comprehension. They don't know that. Who's the only one who knows that? You, the teacher, the person who is in front of the group, okay? They don't know. They couldn't have known that. Your students' preferred learning styles, their personalities, etc. Okay? So, as I've said from the beginning of this talk, they're very valuable, but they are very valuable when it comes to planning a lesson, okay? We can never just say, okay, guys, open the book and let us do 1, and you do 2, and you do 3, okay? That's not going to work, and I'm sure in your teaching context, that would never work, okay? So, I want to plan a lesson, okay, for elementary 2, second grade elementary school. And I want to adapt my textbook. I want to use what my textbook offers. So what is it that I need to do? Well, first of all, I need to carefully analyze the social practice of the language, okay, that belongs to that particular unit I'm going to be working on, and the task that is the learning product. But guess what? Not only for that unit, but for the entire cycle. For the entire cycle. Because, as you know better than me, okay, PRONI syllabus is divided in cycles, okay? We have 4 different cycles. And each cycle corresponds to a different proficiency level in the Common European Framework. So, for example, cycle 1, okay, which I like the way they put it in Spanish, because it says etapa de sensibilización. And I like that, because it's like we want the student to be open to the language at this stage, okay? This stage goes from preschool 3 to elementary 1 and 2. Okay, and the level, the proficiency level in the Common European Framework would be pre-A1, pre-A1, all right? So I have to keep that in mind. Then cycle 2 goes from elementary 3, or covers elementary 3 and 4. And the proficiency level is A1. So that's the level I'm going to be working on, okay? I'm going to move, let's say, along A1. Cycle 3 is elementary 5 and 6. And the level is A2, okay? A2. Finally, cycle 4, which covers all middle school or secundaria, that is from first to third grades, that is B1. That is B1. And that has its complexities, because I was reading in some of the comments that you typed in the chat box earlier this week that some of you are middle school English teachers, and that you sometimes receive students who have not taken any previous English classes, okay? So we will see what we can do. So thinking of this, okay, I have to carefully analyze my social practice of the language. I have to carefully analyze the task, Just give me a minute, please. Oh, sorry. Oh, yes. Okay, so in order to do this, okay, I want you to notice in preschool, elementary first, elementary second, it's the social practice of the language is very similar, but it's evolving. Explora y reacciona. Entiende y responde, usa. And the rest is the same. Expresiones de saludo, cortesía y despedida. Okay? So how to plan a lesson? I'm going to do this very, very quickly, but tomorrow we are going to have a session in which we are actually I'm going to walk you through all the steps, okay? So you have to review the repertoire and decide if it's okay for your students' level. If it's too difficult, go back to the previous SPL within the same cycle and the same communicative activity, consolidate it and come back. Make your own list of linguistic elements based on your students' level and previous knowledge. Also, decide which elements need to be recycled, reviewed, presented, and practiced. And decide how you're going to do that. What works best? If it's grammar, can I use TTT? Do I need PPP? If it's vocabulary, can I use TPR? Tomorrow we will talk about those techniques, which I'm sure you could teach me. What else? Select coursebook visuals, audios, activities that are useful for my lesson plan. Get ideas and suggestions from the teacher's guide and adapt them when possible. And just keep in mind, okay, that we adapt to students. We don't expect students to adapt to us or to the syllabus. It's like, okay, no, sorry, I have to teach you this, and if you don't understand it, well, it's what I have to do, okay? We don't do that. We use every trick we know of to promote learning. Every trick we know and we know of. So it's something that we might have heard about and we've never tried, but use it. We should gradually stay away from Spanish. It is difficult, especially with true beginners, but little by little, okay? Use your hands, your facial expressions, gestures. Our ultimate goal is to help students gradually improve their competence within the proficiency level. So if the proficiency level I'm working on is pre-A1, well, that's the level I'm going to be working on. So thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Claudia. It was a very good presentation. I liked it very much. And I have some questions for you from the audience. Let's read some.
Sure.
The first one is, can you talk a little bit more about visual scaffolding?
Yes, very briefly. Visual scaffolding is anything students can see and relate to their knowledge of the world or any previous knowledge they may have, which helps them understand or process something I am presenting.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Another question. This is from Karen Lisbeth González Farelo. ¿Cómo trabajar con los libros de texto cuando estos no están diseñados acorde al nivel de inglés de mis alumnos?
Well, that's what I've been trying to answer, really. That's the question I've been trying to answer. I don't know whether I should answer in Spanish. Es la pregunta que he estado tratando de contestar. Pero mañana vamos a tener otra sesión en la que vamos a ver esos casos. ¿Qué puedo hacer? ¿No?
Perfect. I have another question for you. It is Arrieta Hernandez. Is it acceptable if sometimes I use a different material instead of the book given? I do it to foster my students' confidence and communication skills.
Of course. The answer is of course. You are the teacher. You are the one who makes the decisions. Based on what? On what your students have to learn or we want them to learn.
Excellent. Another question. Marisol Valencia Lázaro. Do you consider that the activities on the SEP books are according to the social practice instead and expected in each level?
Again. It was not I'm not very clear on what the question is.
Do you consider that the activities on the SEP books are according to the social practice expected in each level?
Okay. I think they may be. They may be according to the proficiency level, but we will see how to adapt them. Okay, just let's work on that tomorrow.
Perfect. Another one. This is in Spanish. Norma Elena Larcón Guevara, ¿cómo trabajar con alumnos de los diferentes grados que nunca han tenido inglés?
See, that's a very, very good question, because if my student has never had English, I need to go back. I need to go back, and that is something we will see. I need to go back.
Okay, perfect. I have another question.
Mhm.
How important is to make our students understand that grammar is important to communicate accurately, avoiding confusion or misunderstandings?
Well, if you provide them with examples in which grammar is misused, and so the phrase is ambiguous, even at a very early stage, I'm sure they can notice. So my question in very few words would be, have students reflect, use reflection.
Okay, perfect. The last one. This one's from Jorge Luis Maldonado. Good afternoon. I think usually textbooks are boredom for students, especially for kids. And a better way to teach English is by planning games or doing dynamic activities. What do you think?
I totally agree with you. But again, if you tell me that textbooks are boring for students, I immediately imagine a teacher having all students in the classroom open the books and, okay, you read the instructions and you do number one. Who wouldn't be bored to tears or to death? No, the textbook is only a source of suggestions and possible input. We will talk about that tomorrow. Games with children, of course, always.
Okay, Claudia, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
But we will see you tomorrow.
Yes, I hope you enjoyed it or didn't suffer too much.
Well, thank you very much. And
Bye.
see you next time. See you next time, Claudia. Thank you very much. See you, all the audience, and thank you very much for being with us today.